What's up, guys? We're starting the dry sump install on my new Dodge Viper GTS. It's a 1998 model. Here you can see some of the parts that we've got to the side. Here's the pan. Underneath we got our inline filters, our pump, a little catch can, some various other things. Sorry, wife came out and had some things to tell me. So yeah, we've got on our pan, our pump, our inline filters, catch can, various other things, tank, all of the plumbing, mounting, gaskets, O-rings, bearings, vacuum regulator, all that kind of good stuff. We got a lot of those parts in. We don't have any of the lines because we kind of got to figure out where we're going to mount the tank first before we do any line measurements or ordering of that stuff. I could probably make my own lines, and I have for the oil cooler before, but I just would rather someone with a little more precision and skill to do it for this dry sump. Investing all this money in it, why would I get cheap on the lines? So here's the car. It's obviously I've already started a little bit of this. I've got the intake box off. I've got my upper radiator hose off. You'll note that that's not a factory radiator hose. I got in a bind at Coda where the upper line split while I was on track, and so we ran to O'Reilly's real quick and started looking off the shelf. So if you ever need one in a bind, you can get that 80MH70 hose, and it will generally fit. Like, it won't fit perfect, but it will generally fit the plumbing from your upper male fitting on your radiator to the male receptacle on the thermostat housing of your water pump. So generally, if you get a bind, you can go get that 80MH70, whatever that part number was that I just showed you. The power steering lines are off. As you can see by that rainbow shade of driveway, that I love Bud Light, and I dispose of all my fluids properly. I don't typically do anything like that, but we're kind of in a bind and trying to move some things along today. I tried to catch most of the fluid, but some of it got out. So yeah, power steering, cooler is off, lines are capped, lower radiator hose is disconnected, the fluid's drained out. I'm probably going to remove my AC condenser housing because I've got to disconnect the AC compressor anyway, so I'll probably take this off, yank the condenser out. My system's not charged anyway, so I can do that here. But yeah, so going over some of the things that I know we initially need to do is we will have to remove this cross member, and by that we'll jack from underneath the car up here on the front frame rail, and it'll kind of split the fenders apart enough to where you can unbolt this, and it should pull right out. I know we'll have to take the alternator out, then probably the crank pulling and stuff. I should be able to leave my water pump attached to the timing cover and shouldn't have any issues there. So yeah, so those are our next steps. Probably taking the alternator off, obviously the serpentine belt first, then the cross member, then it'll really give us some room to work. So here's your update. Alright guys, I have taken out the two upper shock tower mounting brace bolts on each side. I have removed the lower mount. As you can see, I haven't fiddled with this at all off camera, so it should just come right out after I pry it by all of this wiring crap. So now we have so much more room to work to access the crankshaft pulley and the crankshaft bolt and getting the damper off. So we just have so much more room to work now that we've gotten that out. Dad, what have we done?
Not much.
Well, we've got to have done something. Let's go through the list. What have we done?
Okay, we took off the air conditioning compressor.
Okay, yeah, I see that. We took the AC compressor off. We got the condenser off too.
Took the condenser off. We took the alternator off.
Yep, alternator's off, and this little tab broke while we were doing it. It's like a really thin piece of metal there, so anyone doing this in the future, be real careful.
Oil was drained.
Oil's drained. The oil cooler fittings have been removed because we need to step those up to dash 16 fittings, I believe. This is a Setrab aftermarket oil cooler 72 row, so you're probably going to have some kind of adjustment with your oil cooler no matter what, but mine was specifically to upsize the male receptacle fittings. Daddy, what else have we done?
Took the oil filter adapter off.
Okay, yeah, so the oil filter adapter is off. You can probably see that now. Position you there, you can see the plate is there, or rather the spot on the block where it goes.
And the heater core hoses.
Okay, yeah, heater core hoses are coming off. What we're going to try and plan to do is to remove the heater core box and maybe mount the tank in here on the firewall. Thinking that that's the only place that that's really going to fit. So that's what we're going after. We'll drop the pan next. We'll drop the windage tray next. Then we'll replace the connecting rod bearings, or we'll check them and then probably replace them while we're at it. Because we got to drop the pan anyway, so it's a might as well kind of thing. Get them down. Well, we had some trouble getting the pan down. We had to get a pry bar and pry it down because it was seated on there so well. Credit to yours truly. Alright. Gonna grab that side. Let's drop it down. Alright. And there she blows. There she is.
This is a 4-volt.
Alright, Dad, where are we at today?
Well, we removed the windage tray, so we can cross that off.
Okay.
And next we are going to either check or change the rod bearing connecting rods.
Okay. Alright, and yeah, as you can see below, here's our windage tray out of the car. I had previously drilled these holes to help allow for better oil drain back to the pan. One thing I came across as we were taking off the oil filter adapter last night, hopefully you can see the place on the block where those ports for oil flow are down there at the bottom. But as we were kind of taking off the heater core hoses, we were kind of wondering, okay, how's this all going to plumb? Because you see the lines coming off of the water pump. There are two lines coming off the water pump. There's a line that goes to the thermostat housing, and I was wondering, all right, how are we going to connect it? Because our plan is to try and remove this this heater core box and possibly mount our reservoir tank to the firewall. So I was wondering kind of how we were going to loop those three things together, but I think I was just having a blonde moment because as I look, this second line that comes off of the water pump, that just routes up here to the expansion tank right there. You see that little braided cover that's over the line protecting it from the header? That just goes back to the expansion tank. So really, all we're going to have to do is really connect the line going to the thermostat housing right here to this line coming off of the water pump. So what we'll probably end up doing is just connecting these two hoses over here after we remove the box, and just retaining those heater core lines as they are, and not trying to reinvent the wheel. So we'll probably just cut them and put a little barb fitting in between them and call it a day. So that's our update for right now. We'll get to work on checking and probably replacing the connecting rod bearings, and we'll kind of show you how that's done as well. Alright guys, so as you can see, we've got the pan off, the windage tray off. What we're doing right now is we're changing the connecting rod bearings. We've done 3 and 4 right so far. We've done 7 and 8 so far. And what we do is we rotate the engine via the crank bolt. We rotate it over until 2 of the cylinders are at bottom dead center. And then at that point we take the connecting rod caps off, and we are checking the bearings. We're gonna replace them all, but we're still looking at them, inspecting them, seeing what kind of wear we're experiencing, and then we're replacing. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna rotate the engine over until we get 2 cylinders at bottom dead center, and then we'll start replacing the bearings. Keep going, you got a little while. Okay. I'll be doing 1 and 2 next. Okay, slow, but keep going. Just a little bit more. Okay, there. Okay, now these 2 are bottom dead center, and we're going to loosen those and start replacing the. These are 14 millimeters. Yeah, do you have the zip ties ready?
Yeah.
Okay. So one thing that we do is we distinguish between the caps using zip ties. We put a zip tie through the driver's side of the cap, and then we make one of them small and one of them big to differentiate between which cylinder it relates to, so that we know which ones we're putting up, because between which ones we're putting back, because they are side specific. We'll do number 1 is the small. We'll do number 2 is the large hoop. Okay? Dad?
Okay.
So I'm handing you cylinder number 1 right now. Okay. So we're going to put a zip tie through this hole, because this is the driver's side, and this is cylinder number 1. You can probably see a little bit of bearing wear. This one's really not that bad compared to some of the others that we've already pulled off. It's got some wear, but it's not terrible. Nothing that you can really feel with your fingertip. So Dad, put a zip tie through that one. We'll do that one small. As oil drips on my neck. Okay.
That's one.
That was one. This is number two. If you'll put a big hole through it, a big circle for the zip tie. All right. So this is our second cap, and this one's got a little bit more wear, as you can probably see. You can feel it a little bit, but not really. So it's still some wear, not terrible. Some of the other ones we've already taken off have been much worse. So that's that for right now, and then I'll push the. Dad, did you note that cylinder 1 was the small hoop and cylinder 2 was the large?
Yeah, just work down.
Okay. All right. Thank you. And then what we've got here are our Cleveite connecting rod stud holders. So what these will do is you put these over the studs, and they can protect the crank journal from getting scraped up or scratched whenever you're pushing these up into their cylinders. And so I don't have a lot of these, so I only have 2 actually. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put them over the ones that are most likely to hit the crank journal, just to protect those a little bit as I push these pistons back up in their cylinders. Again, you should probably get 4 of these, but I only have 2 right now. So now we're pushing the piston back up in the cylinder, and then we'll pull the bearings out. This one has a bit of wear, especially in the center. You can see on the outside it's got a little more material, but the center has really got a decent amount of wear to it. Not really that bad though. Really not as bad as the last time I took them off. So the other upper is out, and you can see again there's a little bit of wear on the outsides. In the mid center is particularly where there's a little bit of wear, but really again not that bad. These 2 cylinders are really not that bad. So here's our crankshaft journal, our connecting rods. We push the cylinders or the pistons up into the cylinder. We're gonna set bearings up here. Then we'll set bearings on the connecting rod caps, and then what we'll do is we'll bolt them down, tighten them to spec, and use some plastic gauge to see whether they are in spec as to the right amount of clearance. We are going to install this new end cap on cylinder 1, because this had the small loop around the zip tie. That's how we distinguish, because they are side specific. They are cylinder specific. So we've got our plastic gauge sitting there on the connecting rod bearing, and what we'll do is we'll tighten it up to spec. We'll tighten the other one up to spec too, and then we'll measure the clearance once they are put down. And then we will check the size of the plastic gauge after it's been tightened to spec. Free again, and measure our clearance. So now our plastic gauge has its smear mark, and we can check it against the gauge that they provide with the kit. And so really you can see that it's about 15 thousandths, which is great because that's exactly what the manual calls for. So we know that this one's good, and we can bolt it back up to the connecting rod and tighten it to spec. What we'll do is we'll check the next one here before we finish tightening. But the other ones have been in pretty good shape, so I'm willing to bet that this one, this cylinder number 2, is going to be in the same spot because they've all been pretty much in the same ballpark. Man, my arms get tired of sitting up above my head.
Well, I can do the forking and stuff if you want to do.
Yeah, I'll trade out with you in a little bit. Alright. So we're going to check this one now. This one kind of got smeared with some of the assembly lube that you can see. So really this didn't tell us a whole lot. I feel pretty confident that we're okay, so I'm not going to dry this off and remeasure because all the other ones have been in great shape. The one on the same cylinder has been showed to be about 15 thousandths, so I feel pretty confident to keep rolling forward, but that's how you check the connecting rod bearing clearance using some plastic gauges. You tighten them to spec, you remove the cap back off. However, I have just forgotten an important step, which is we need to add assembly lube to the bottom bearings, which I haven't done yet, so I'm going to be correcting that right now. So here, I'm going to add a little assembly lube. That way, when you first start up your engine, you've got something with a high tack strength that's going to protect your bearings when they don't immediately have oil pressure. That really won't be a problem here with this dry sump because you'll be able to prime the engine on your own without it running. You'll be able to spin the pump while the engine is not running because it's an externally driven oil pump. So we'll be able to put a drill on the front input shaft of the oil pump, and we'll be able to supply oil to the rest of the engine. So it's not really a big deal, but it's still something I'd like to practice and make sure I'm using assembly lube as I'm changing these connecting rod bearings as they break in a little bit. Again, that's really what you're going to see whenever you assemble these and use the plastic gauge correctly. If the assembly lube hadn't gotten on the other one, we would have had a similar reading, most likely. Again, these are 14 millimeter, and they torque to 45 foot-pounds. While we're here, what we can do is we can check our side clearance between the bearings, between the connecting rods. So we've got more than 10 thousandths, which is the bottom line spec. So let's try 15. Really? So let's try 13. 13 fits, but tightly, so try a little closer to 10 than that. Yeah, 10 fits pretty easily, so really we're probably realistically looking at a 12 to 11 thousandths of or hundredths of side clearance, which is right within spec, but that's something you can do while you're down here, is check the connecting rod side clearances using a feeler gauge. So we were taking off the connecting rod bearings for cylinders 5 and 6 here, as you can see. I didn't take any video before, which I should have, but there was a little bit of wear on the crankshaft. You could kind of feel it with your fingertip, and so I've got some 2000 grit with some 20W50 oil soaked on it, and then a shoelace wrapped around the crank journal. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to gently sand back and forth to kind of get rid of some of that ridge that you have in the crank journal. So what this does is it kind of provides somewhat even pressure to kind of sand around the journal. And I'll pause right there so you can kind of see the ridges and the lines in the crank journal. If you want to move up a little closer, Dad, thank you. Yeah, so you can see some of the lines in the crankshaft. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to just try and sand it down a little bit to where it's a little bit less of a ridge and maybe won't prematurely wear out the next bearing quite so quickly. This isn't going to take off much material at all, but it will take off enough to maybe sand it a little bit smooth. Mike Senna, he lives in Lamar. He doesn't have a Viper anymore, but he used to have a Gen 2 Viper that that he showed me this trick, and now the sandpaper is getting a little bound, but you kind of get the idea. So now there's still a little ridge up top here that I can feel with my finger, so I'm going to take it off and do some more sanding. Okay, so as I've gone back and watched some of the video of us doing some work, I realized there's some gaps in what's going on, what's happening, why we're doing some of the things that we're doing. So I want to kind of fill you in on some of those gaps. So when we were replacing the connecting rod bearings, you saw me sanding one of the crankshaft journals. The reason I was doing that was that you could see some visible wear around the crankshaft journal, and you could even feel it too. When you scratched it with your fingertip, you could feel a little ridge a little bit in the crankshaft. It was really slight, very minimal, but nothing you can't just polish out with a little bit of like really fine grit sandpaper and some oil. I've done it before. It's not a big deal. So that was why we were doing that. There was a little bit of wear on the crankshaft journal. You might not be able to hear that in the original video because the sound isn't so great on these things. You might not have seen us pull the crankshaft damper off. We were having a little issue with that. It was kind of walking off a little wobbly. We think that's because the bolt that runs through the center of the puller was maybe getting altered too much by the steering rack. So maybe we should have moved that a little bit more. So that's kind of a 2020 hindsight's 2020 moment where we probably should have moved the steering rack a little bit more before we set that bolt inside of the crankshaft. So we have some damage inside of the crankshaft in those threads. So we'll have to get a tap and run that through it. Trying to think of what other major issues we ran into. Like I said, we're at a standstill with the installing the new pan because these studs that also double as main cap bolts, they house the windage tray. The windage tray is what scrapes the oil off the crankshaft, or at least scrapes the oil flying off the crankshaft and feeds it to the sump in your pan. Well, those holders are probably three inches in length. And the dry sump pans sit way up, much higher than wet sump pans. So those studs are hitting the pan. So we have to either cut those off or find some regular main cap bolts and install those instead. I haven't decided what we're going to do with that yet. So we'll figure that out and proceed at some point. Right now we're just in teardown mode, continuously taking parts off the vehicle, but. We've made a lot of progress. I mean, let's run through it. Like we've got the crank bolt out, we've drained the oil, dropped the pan, removed the windage tray, changed all the connecting rod bearings, removed the oil filter adapter, removed the crank bolt, crank pulley, crank damper, pulled the timing cover, removed the oil pump, removed the AC lines, removed the heater core and the heater core housing. Obviously timing cover and oil pump are off. We crossed those off twice. But yeah, so we're making some progress. A lot of this job is the creative part of where you're going to mount things and route things. So what I want the shortest lines possible from my reservoir tank to my pump. I don't want to route them all the way from the rear of the car where it'd be pretty easy to mount it real quick. But then you got to run 10-foot lines, 12-foot lines all the way from there to here to your pump, and it just makes it that much more expensive and complicated. And so I kind of want to keep it all neat and in one area. I know doing things neat isn't exactly my MO, but we're going to try it for once.
That's it for this video. Stay tuned for the removal of the timing cover, the pulling of the oil pump, modification of the timing cover in the side of the engine block casting, figuring out some oil pressure gauge problems, routing of some lines, plumbing valve cover fittings, and I can't even think of what else. There's so many things that needed to be done. So thanks for watching part 1, and please like and subscribe, and stay tuned for part 2. Thanks.